That first step I really find is, do you know yourself deeply? And I think this is the easiest, this is probably the most fun step. So, like if I'm going to go and try and figure out who I am, I mean, these are like, do you know what you like? Do you know what you don't like?
Yeah.
What are you good at? What are you not good at? And you may ask, well, how do I decide what's good and bad? It's
Yeah.
totally up to you, right? Because what you might think is weird might actually be good for somebody else. The hardest part is that if we can't find some acceptance for it on our own, it's very hard to enroll people to help us with those ugly parts.
Welcome to the show, Mac. Thank you for coming here today. Before we get started, I suppose it'd be good for you to introduce yourself to the audience so they know who you are.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Richard. My name is Mac Ling. I'm an executive coach based here in Hong Kong, and I work primarily with leaders throughout the region and across a number of different topics. And we'll get into some of the work that I've been doing specifically later today. But other fun facts: I'm a father of two young boys, which has taken up a lot of my time over the last couple of years, and so. But it's definitely one of the most enjoyable things that I do, and really has given me a new passion and a new interest in men's work. And so men's emotional health and really helping men to find mental health support.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, I was lucky enough to just see Orion, one of the little ones. As being an executive coach, some of the things that you've picked up on as, I suppose, common trends, lack of self belief, and looking at building self worth, not on imitation of others. So let's start with some of these points that you do kind of pick up and find as a trending points from the people that you work with. So lack of self belief, that seems to be an area that comes up quite often, right?
It does, it does. And you know what? The funny thing over the last few years, what I started to realize was people don't raise that as the initial issue, right? So
Yeah.
they're sort of like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm like not achieving what I want in my career, or like, I want to get to that next level, and I'm, having a hard time doing blah, blah, blah. And what I started realizing as I was meeting with clients is that it's strange that I'm having the same conversation with multiple people every day.
Yeah.
And but we didn't start at that place. And I think that's where I started to really start to see this pattern of, wow, like people really need some help around creating their own confidence, understanding who they are. And then, I think there's this advice that we give people. We're like, well, just be you, just be your authentic
Yeah.
self.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. You hear that a lot.
there was no
Yeah.
how. Like, how do you do that? You're like, well, I am me, but am I being me? And so I think that's really what led me down this path of trying to help distill down like what does it look like and how do you start to build authenticity so that we can really spark our own fire of self-belief and self-worth,
Yeah.
and rather than rely so heavily on external validation and having the need to get other people to say, hey, great job, Mac, keep doing that good work, or on the flip side just being completely overturned when somebody's like, hey, that was a really terrible job you did on that project, and so now
Yeah.
my self-worth is in the toilet.
What are the first things you do? Is it identifying where it comes from? Because it's interesting we say that talk about this because I've written a little bit about this in a book that I'm looking at publishing, and how we've kind of grown and into being not who we should really be based on society, based on things that maybe our parents have said when growing up, or things that we see, especially on social media. We believe that we should be doing one thing, but is it really, really what we want to do? How do you drill down with somebody and like you said, how? How do we
Yeah.
move forward from that?
And I think you bring up, really where I think this all starts. And I think, what I've seen is that the media, social media has created a number of models of what success looks like in
Yeah.
our world. And so then we look at these, role models, idols, and we're like, well, I want to be more like Elon Musk, or I want to be Elon Musk, or I want to be Steve Jobs. And we get these very singular dimensional like images of who these people were, right?
Mm,
And if you've read his books, Steve Jobs was not the most beautiful person, right? Like he was pretty relentless in
yeah.
how he went about getting things done. If we try and imitate only the best parts of who these men and women are, then it's very difficult because we're not getting a complete picture of who they were. And
Yeah.
we are complete people trying to imitate fractions of, stories that we hear about. So I think that's one of the biggest, challenges that I think our world and adults in our society are facing right now. Is like, well, how do we figure out a model for ourselves? And what do I look like when I'm successful?
Hmm.
And it may not look like everybody else, and it
Mm.
probably won't look like everybody else.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of fear in that because then there's no roadmap. And I think that's where it comes down to, this idea that we need to look inwards so that we can understand who we are. Then we can come back out and then, put something out for the world to see. Jumping into the steps, that first
Yeah.
step I really find is, do you know yourself deeply? And, how do you do that? And I think this is the easiest, this is probably the most fun step. So, like if I'm going to go and try and figure out who I am, I mean, these are like, do you know what you like? Do you know what you don't like?
Yeah.
What are you good at? What are you not good at? And honestly, like, what are the things that, make you mad? What are your pet peeves? And so there are some really nice personality assessments. There are nice, I prefer the Enneagram. So if any of you listeners have used the Enneagram, I find that to be a really nice, it's a nice model that helps look at your motivations for doing things rather than looking at your behaviors and then trying to, make some assumptions about who you are.
Hmm.
Um, so that's like a nice fun one. You can also like ask your friends. I think that's a really great
Yeah.
way, sit down, have a coffee, like, hey, like tell me about me. Like, what am I good at? What do you think? How would you describe me in 3 words?
Yeah.
And that really creates, yeah, just some external validation, right? You may be talking to your partner and your partner's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, whoa, that's not what I would have said about myself. And it really helps to create this nice body of, okay, I'm getting a nicer picture of who, I think at least I'm representing to the world, and then you can really match it up with what you come up with yourself.
Yeah.
Um, Last tip I'll just throw in there: journaling is really powerful.
Yeah.
It's a great tool to really unlock what's going on inside. So if you can just write down some things that are in your head, that's always just a very easy way to like, yeah, get your mind out into something that's more processing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Step two is the most difficult part of this equation. And step two is what I call accepting the good, the bad, the weird, and the ugly of yourself.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is that I think, when we go back to this, understanding of society and, the pressure that we face, there's a lot of pressure to only talk about the good things about ourselves.
Yeah.
And, so on Instagram, I'm not, showing, photos of when I'm like having an emotional breakdown, because we have this belief that nobody wants to see those ugly moments.
Mm.
And, that those are private moments. You should not share those moments. Um, and so that means we also haven't really created a great deal of acceptance for ourselves to have those moments either. So we're like, well, I'm not going to show it to the world, but I don't even know if I want to have those moments.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where, I have this simple but difficult exercise that you can do.
Okay.
And so if you just get an A4 sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, put it 4 quadrants, and just write good, bad, weird, and ugly.
Yeah.
And if you can start to write down in those boxes some of the characteristics, some of your quirks, weird things in those boxes. And you may ask, well, how do I decide what's good and bad? How do I decide what's weird and ugly?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
totally up to you, right? Because what you might think is weird might actually be good for somebody else, and or so and so forth, right? So you can really sit and start to look at, okay, well, what are the things about me that maybe I haven't even ever written down? And so, one of the as I was working with some clients and having some of these conversations, like, so one of the things I'm sharing with people most recently, so people are like, oh, well, what do you put in like a weird box? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
in my weird box, I have this strange but like limiting block where it's very hard for me to listen to music with lyrics
Mhm.
and process what they're saying in the song. So, I've listened to some songs for, 20 years of my life. And my wife is listening to me sing the song, and I'm singing the song in air quotes. And she's like, that is not what they're saying. I'm like, oh, it's not? And I'm just singing the words that I think I'm hearing. And she's like, no, that you're like way off. And I was like, oh yeah, it's really hard for me to like understand the lyrics because the way I listen to music, I listen to the music as like one whole stream. And so like I'm actually very good with melodies and harmony and like and I understand the musical structure. But
Yeah.
then you ask me like what the song is about. I'm like, I have no idea. They're like, she's like, this is a song about suicide. I was like, oh, I don't know. It seemed all right to me. It seemed like pretty happy. And so it's fascinating for her. She's like, and she's like, I don't understand how your mind works. And I was like, well, I mean, it also like, and how I then extrapolate this is that actually when I sit and listen to somebody speaking, I'm very, very focused on their words. And so I have a very like lack of excuse the pun, like I have a very one track mind when I listen to people because I can really tune everything else out.
Hmm.
Whereas when I'm listening to the music, I tune out everything else. So I'm really only very focused on like the notes and like understanding how the musical structure is being created.
Yeah.
So, then we can talk about how that integrates into, the work that I do. But you can start to see like this would never show up in a resume or any sort
No.
of like, document. But, it's like a weird part of my life that, nobody really has
No.
ever asked me.
Yeah.
The ugly box I find is the most difficult box
Yeah.
to figure out. And I think you have to get, fairly honest with yourself. You can do this with a coach as well, and have somebody help ask you some questions. But I think, some of these ugly things can be, how are you under pressure? Like what
Mhm.
happens when you get really stressed out?
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about my dad. My dad is a terrible he manages his hunger terribly. So like when he gets hungry, he gets really hangry. And so he is sometimes, I mean, I'll
Stay
say
out of his way.
unbearable, and he just like is very single-minded. He's like, I need to eat, and this is the only thing that matters. And so, we have come to like love and understand this about him. And we're like, oh wow, we haven't eaten for like 4.5 hours. We probably need to find like McDonald's set fast. But this again would never show up anywhere. But part of it is that can we create some acceptance for us and know this about ourselves
Mhm.
so that we can probably tell people, hey, like, honey, like, you need to know that, like, I get really hangry. And if I don't eat, and my blood sugar drops, I'm going to be really unbearable to deal with. So, just remind me or just, hey, like, I mean, maybe, just make sure we have some snacks and different things around. Because I think the hardest part is that if we can't find some acceptance for it on our own, it's very hard to enroll people to help us with those ugly parts, or
Mhm.
at least acknowledge that they exist so that they don't come up and bite us when, we're just like in our, maybe feeling unaware or just, yeah, feeling stressed or in our worst moments.
Yeah.
So that's number two. And then the
Yep.
last piece, once we have some of that, we really start to look at how do we integrate all of these things together. And then the fun part comes of, well, how do I share my unique gifts with the world?
Mhm.
And so then from going from there, you're like, well, for me, I have a very empathetic side. I have this very critical thinking, analysis, math brain,
Yep.
and I listen really well. And so it actually has come into this really nice place where I found a profession and I found work as a coach where I get to use all of that and create value for people by just sitting and listening and doing my funny little thing in my head. And I think that's really where we start to set ourselves apart, where we don't have to compete anymore because I don't feel like I have to compete against other coaches. I'm
Yeah.
doing what I do. And if somebody loves it, then it's going to resonate with them and
Yeah. Yeah.
forward. And it may not resonate with others. And so then you're like, well, then, there's plenty of people out there to work with.
Yeah. I'm just relating myself a little bit to some of what you said, actually. This is
Yeah.
if you're at a point where you can create this list for yourself, the ugly, the bad, the good, you create this list. If you're unhappy, let's say with the career you're in, or because I think that's one thing is a lot of people are in a career that they're not happy with, or how do you identify and how do you match what you do, and how do you break over the cycle or the fear of making that move? Because a lot of people would be scared to make that move. They'd be like, right, okay, great. I've got all the things that I like, I'm passionate about and excited about and good. How do you get over the fear of taking that leap? Because I know there's loads of people that are unhappy, but they never make the leap. They never make that jump.
The simple, I don't know, maybe an easy answer is go meet a coach.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
talk to some coaches,
Yeah.
because that's really what like our profession is there to do. It's,
Mhm.
we're there to listen, we're there to help you unpack, and then we're there to help you to examine some of those limiting beliefs that you might have about yourself and your life.
Mm.
And those limiting beliefs, that's the fear of like, well, like nobody's going to want what I want, or
Yeah.
nobody's going to want what I have to offer. I hear that all the time. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, do you have actual evidence
Yeah.
to show me that nobody wants what you're selling? I'm like, well, I had a talk with a few friends, like, oh. So that's the end all be all, right? And so we can do really good jobs in our minds of creating stories
Mhm.
that actually confirm the initial beliefs that we have about the world,
Yeah.
and we get a dopamine hit every
Yep.
single time we make that story happen.
Yeah.
And then we get more hits when we're like, yes, validated, validated. I'm so right. My judgment about the world is correct. And then we just build this wall of like, you know what? Nothing good is ever going to happen to me. And every time nothing good happens to me, I get another dopamine hit and it
Mm.
feels good.
Mm.
And so you can start to see like we can start to build ourselves into these mental prisons. And so when you start to talk to somebody who is more trained in like looking at, what you're saying
Yeah.
and asking you some questions that, I don't know, maybe your friends or your family aren't willing to ask you because they're pretty like sharp questions sometimes.
Yeah.
You may be forced to sit and think about, oh yeah, am I making that up? Hmm. Okay. Maybe I'm willing to try something.
Mhm.
And part of that really is then it goes to some courage, which I think also helps with
Yeah.
some friends or support. It's like, can you just take a moment of courage to go do something new?
Mhm.
I think that piece of it, once we identify, okay, is this really where you want to go? Like, is this the first step you want to take? Okay, then we can start to talk about, okay, like, let's take some steps together.
Yeah. I, I I love the fact you've mentioned courage. I think one of my favorite words is brave. Just be brave, and well, he who dares wins. I don't know if you know the SAS, the Special Air Service, the UK, one of the UK Special Forces, but that's their motto: "He who dares wins." And I completely agree. There has to be that element of courageousness and bravery to take that first step. Is there a somebody of your experience and expertise? Is there a way to build that if somebody's lacking? It's a bit of lacking confidence, isn't it? How do you help somebody build that part if that's the bit that's stopping them?
There's a nice model that I share with clients. What's interesting is our world, we have this framework that I think we're taught maybe in school. And
Yep.
the framework kind of goes like this: if you do the things you're supposed to do, then you're going to have the results you're going to have, and then you're going to be this person that you want to be.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I think it's a little flawed
Yeah.
because a lot of times, and this is where imposter syndrome comes from, right? You're like,
Mm.
well, I did the work, and then I got the results. I like got the promotion, and then I'm supposed to be this person,
Mm.
and we miss that jump. And you're like, oh no, I still feel like the person who's trying to do the work, and I feel like fake.
Yeah.
And so this model is unfortunately like what is propagated through our systems. And so if we have to like re-examine the model, and a way that I find works better for people is that we have to find the belief first that
Mm.
we can do this thing,
Mhm.
right? And that's that courage of like, okay, well, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to create a belief that like, yes, today I'm stepping into a new chapter and I'm going to make today the first day of my like new career,
Yeah.
right? I create a belief. Then I can do the result, do the work, and then I can have the results that I want to have.
Mhm.
And I think that becomes a different way of looking at it, because then we don't end up missing this belief part, right? If we
Yeah.
start by cultivating the belief first, and
Yeah.
it may feel a little weird because you're like, well, I don't really believe that I'm there. Well, okay, well, I mean, what do you have to lose, you
Mm.
know?
Mhm.
And so we start from some belief. Then when we get to the like results, then we can really celebrate. We're like, wow, like I'm the CEO and it feels so good, and like I have the life that I want.
Yeah.
When we do some coaching work, one of the things I like to use is a mandate. And the mandate looks a lot like, up until now, I have been tired, unmotivated, something, blah, 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 blah. And like, you can talk a little bit about, how you've been up until now.
Okay.
And from now on, I will be excited about life, engaged, a better father, a better partner.
Mhm.
And we use this so that you can start to see where the signpost is. Like, okay, from up until August 26th, I've been this person.
It's a
From
measure, like a
August
yeah,
27th on, I will be this person. And
yeah.
so we really use language to help us shape where we want to go and then to delineate those moments of like, I'm creating a new belief and it
Mhm.
looks like this.
Right. Okay. Okay. It's like it's almost like a measuring tool in the right. This is where you started, and then you hit your milestones. Right. Okay. How do you feel today, or a month later? Or what are some of the other things that pop up when you're doing your coaching and tools that you use? I like that you're sharing some of these concepts and tools that you're talking about.
Because there are these two very different realms, there's my like business and professional coaching, and then there's
Okay.
more individual
Life
life
coach.
coaching.
Right.
Is there one that you think your listeners would be more interested in?
Let's go down the life coaching piece. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go down there.
I think on the life side, people ask, "Oh, well, when do you go see a coach? When do people come find you?"
Yeah.
Um, and I find that generally speaking, they fall into two big groups.
Hmm.
The first group is that they're in the car of their life and they're driving down the road, and their autopilot has been on for a long time,
Yeah.
and something like hits the car, and
Hmm.
they're like, "I need to put my hands back on the wheel because I think something just broke." So like COVID is a big
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
hit the car, and you look up and you look out the windshield and you realize that the destination you set maybe 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago is no longer where you want to end up. And you're
Mm.
like, oh, I know this is not where I want to go anymore. But actually, I have no idea where I do want to go because I've not looked at a map in 20 years. I don't, we've just been like asleep, playing writing the crossword puzzle.
Yeah.
And so I think that first group is looking for some clarity. They're looking for a roadmap to be built, and really to understand like what are my options, who am I, where have I become. So there's a lot
Mm.
of a deep dive into who are you now,
Hmm.
now that you're like putting your hands back on the wheel,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then where would you like to go?
Mm.
That's group one. Group two puts their hands on the wheel and they're like, okay, I definitely don't want to go there anymore. And I've been thinking that I'd really like to go to Berlin,
Mm.
but I haven't driven a car. I haven't done this whole navigation thing
Yeah.
in 5, 10, 20 years. And so I don't want to crash the car. And there's like kids in the back, there's my wife in the back. I don't want my car to crash. So can you help me navigate the path and then drive with me down the road together so
Yeah.
that I get to this place successfully?
Hmm.
And so, you can see the metaphor,
Yeah. I can see it. I like it. Yeah. Yeah.
that's generally where people come to find a coach
Yeah.
and get a lot of value from coaching,
Yeah.
at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
Um,
Are there, because I'm currently, I think, I don't remember speaking to you last time we spoke. I'm going through ICF training at the minute. Um, do you find that what are there people that are a bit confused about what coaching is? There's a lot of people there's people in our class that are struggling with the not giving advice, and I think some people, and I'm assuming anyway. It's, we know what they say about assuming, but I think it's fair to say this. A lot of people are not really sure what coaching is. Still,
yeah,
I think it's bigger in the States. Um, the UK, I'm not really too sure. I think it's kind of there, but I know the US is really big. I don't know what it's like in Hong Kong, where you are, but um,
it's it's emerging.
yeah,
Uh, in 2015, when I started, nobody knew what I was doing. They're like,
yeah,
who are you coaching?" I'm like,
yeah,
people. And they're like, doing what? Um, and so it's a great question, and I think the way that I describe coaching, and maybe would you mind if I talk about how I see some of these like other knowledge workers in the space? Maybe
yeah,
that could,
yeah, yeah. Go
uh,
for it. Yeah,
so I see that there are a couple of different types of people like using their brain to create value essentially.
hmm,
And so I'll just go through those four. And so the first one, you have trainers. And so trainers you hire when you want to learn a new skill.
yeah,
So it could be like public speaking, it could be Microsoft Excel, it could be playing tennis, but
hmm,
you're really asking them to teach you how to do something. That's
yeah,
a trainer.
yeah,
The second one, we have like consultants. So we have a lot of consultants, and we bring in consultants when we have a problem that we can't solve on our own.
hmm,
And so they may have a framework to solve our problem, or they may actually come in and do the work for us.
Yeah.
But they're really using their expertise to help you, do something and
Yeah.
unpack a
Yeah.
problem that you can
And they'll give advice.
and give advice.
They'll
Yeah, a lot
advise.
of advice.
Yeah.
You know, number three, you have therapists, counselors, psychologists, and I see this group really wearing a healer hat
Mm,
first, and they're there to help you initially to heal the wounds of your past.
mm-hmm.
And then once you're in a better state, they can go on with you and really become part of your support system.
Yeah.
And so people who are like, oh yeah, I've been seeing my therapist for 25 years, and they can really become integrated
Yeah.
into your life process.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one I see coaches, and coaches I see as they are helping you to get clarity about that future. So if we use the car, we're looking down
Yeah.
the road and we're getting clarity about where the destination is that we want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that clarity, we can then take a look at where we are currently and then make some course corrections. And then it's all about creating some support and accountability
Yeah.
for, how to get to that new destination.
Mm.
Uh, and I think with coaching, the difference is that, you, the client, are the expert of your own life.
Yeah.
So it's not going to help if I tell you what it works for me or what works for Bob or Jane. Like my job or the coach's job is to ask you some questions to help you see yourself from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe from that new perspective, you gain a new insight about like, oh, okay, maybe I could do it like that. And then from that new
Yeah.
insight, you take some new action that
Yeah.
you would not have normally taken.
Yeah.
And so, like, I would say with a pure coaching model, no advice.
Yeah.
It's purely like I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how to, create a question that might help you unlock something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then, so then from that pure coaching, there's people all the way up and down the spectrum to, there's all different types of coaches. There's spiritual coaches, there's wellness coaches,
Yeah.
coaching coaches. And so
Yeah.
then they overlay their domain onto this. But if like when I use my model, I feel like some of those coaches are more consultants or advisors where they're
Yeah.
really like bringing in their own, we'll call it like expertise and life experience to then help, create value for their clients.
Yeah. 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 It's a good explanation of all of those. And it's for people that are going through like that. So, like I was saying, like the training that I'm going for, been coaching for a long time, but I never got ICF certified. Yeah, the advice part is difficult for some people, isn't it? You kind of sitting in front, unless you've practiced sitting in front of somebody and just asking questions and listening intrinsically to what they're saying. It's a very unique skill to have, because a lot of people want to give advice rather than just listening and asking the questions. Have you got some of your favorite questions that you like to ask?
If I could respond to, what you said, I think as a coach, it is hard to just answer or like to listen with the intention of I'm listening for you.
Yeah.
A lot of times we respond because we want to show how amazing we are, like show how smart we are, or
Yeah.
kinda
Ego.
like yeah, like I'm going to tell you something because I know. And I think what helps me with that is that I really feel like my purpose is to go deep with you and for you.
Mm,
So I'm not asking questions for my own curiosity. Like I may need some like context so that I can ask you a question for you.
yeah.
But really, when we start getting into it, I'm like, well, what could I ask you that would help you unlock something else that may be sitting down below?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's the challenge that I think coaches sometimes get behind because you're like, well, I'm just gonna ask from where I am sitting in my seat
Mm,
and and try and do something that I think might work for me. And so much
yeah.
of it is really getting out of ourselves and saying, okay, like I'm now like in your brain and in
Mhm,
your like context. So then what would help me unlock some new information
mhm,
is
mhm.
maybe a good way to think about
Yeah. Yeah. It's depending on who you've got in front of you and what they're saying. But I'm assuming you got like a little toolbox of certain questions for certain times,
it.
depending
Yes.
on what's going on.
Yes. I would say at the start, when we are kicking off, some good advice a coach gave me, and I don't know if they teach it, but I think that the guiding principle is, coach the person, not the problem.
Mm,
And I think so many times when we start to listen to somebody talk about their stuff,
That's
they're
quite
like, okay,
interesting.
so dive in with you into your problem, And it felt like when I was telling them my problem, they would like, it felt like they were coming into the hot tub with me, and they're like getting in, they pulled up they had a beer, and they're like, okay, like we're gonna go and like figure out your hot tub problem. And I'm like, what are you doing in the hot tub? Like, I don't need you in here. Like,
Your
I'm fine here
metaphors.
by myself. So if we use that hot tub example, I think it can be a lot easier if we stay outside on the concrete, right? Because if you want to get out of the hot tub, then there's no way for me to pull you out of the hot tub when I'm sitting in the hot tub with you. And so that whole idea of coaching the person starts to then look like, okay, I hear you going through this. So what would it mean to you if you found a way out?
Mm.
Like, what would that open up for you? What possibilities get created when you're no longer in the situation? And I find that it takes you and it takes the client out of that space of like, oh, woe is me, the thing sucks and the thing sucks. And you're like, oh, actually, if I didn't have to deal with this, oh wow, like I could go travel again, I could see my family, I could, and you're like, oh, okay, good.
Mm.
Now we're in a different mental space of possibility
Okay.
and opportunity, which allows us to then be creative. And I think that's one of the biggest things that that I do with, people right off the bat is like, hey, we need to not sit in your problem
Yeah.
because I can't solve your problems. You're the only one who can solve
Yeah.
your problems. But I need to help you think about your problem in a different way. So there's that question. I think the other question that I find very helpful is that, we start to distill down like, oh, well, it'd mean like, like it would be really great because I'd, create the impact that I wanted to create, and and I'd really feel very fulfilled. And I think when we start to understand the motivation for why we do things, a really good question is like, well, could you find that same feeling of fulfillment and success by doing something easier,
Mm.
something less involved, and something that's
Yeah.
probably a little bit more within your control,
Mm.
right? And can we start there? Because I think so much of us, and this goes back to the, like we have these big dreams that, these big pressures of like what
Yeah.
success looks like.
Yeah.
And we're all kind of looking for the same few pieces of what
Mm-hmm.
success feels like.
Mm.
And I think when we can start to experience them in smaller ways, and we're like, oh yeah, actually I do really like that. Then it goes to, I can build some confidence by, oh yeah, I was able to do that. It felt good. I would like to continue that. Rather than, setting these huge lofty goals and not having a way to even have a small win.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's really that like, yeah, is there some way to reach that and do it in like a smaller way, an easier way, so you can still have that same feeling of satisfaction?
Yeah. A lot of people don't get started because they just always focused on that grandeur goal. It's just about, well, how do we get started at least? Get started first. So, what are some of the common areas that you pick up from executives or people that you're sitting with when you're doing your executive coaching on the professional side?
So when we start moving into leadership roles, I think one of the biggest, probably new skills that we have to learn how to do is people manage.
Mm.
Like, we take a group of people under us and bring them somewhere and help them, yeah, do the work that we need to do.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest challenges for, people as they move into people management is like, well, how do I like give difficult feedback? How do
Yeah.
I how do I tell somebody they're like not doing a good job? And those difficult conversations, I find we probably bring our own stuff to it because we're like, well, I don't like it when somebody else has this conversation with me. So
Yeah.
then I have to do that to somebody else. So then I'm now the like arbiter of bad feelings towards somebody else. So then we create this whole idea that like, we're now going to be part of this cycle.
Mhm.
And and I think, in a very coaching style, one of the big things that I share with clients is when we have to give feedback, an easy place to start is, what is our shared goal?
Yeah.
So if you and I are working together, if we have a shared goal of like, okay, we're trying to, I don't know, we're trying to, sell $250,000 worth of stuff
Yep.
in the next 6 months. Right?
Yep.
And if we can really start with that alignment of like, hey, like we're working together, we agree that this is where we want to get to, and then we now have a reason to be both trusting of each other and honest with each other. Because if you agree that I can help you get there and you agree that you can help me get there, then I can be more honest with you
Mm.
because it's in service of our shared goal.
Yeah.
And so then when we're starting to give feedback, you're like, okay, so you want to get a promotion. I also want you to get a promotion.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to do everything I can in my power to help you get there.
Mhm.
That also means that I'm going to give you direct feedback. Are you okay with that?
Mhm.
And they can say yes or no. And they mostly say yes because they're like, well, I want to get the promotion. So you're like, okay. So then
Yeah.
when we then reorient the conversation of feedback from less of a adversarial, like I'm telling you that you're doing this thing wrong, to we agreed that you are interested in the promotion and I'm going to help you by giving you some feedback that I think will help you get to this promotion faster.
Mhm.
And people are like, oh, yes, I would gladly accept your feedback because it is framed in a way that, wow, you're helping me to get to my goal.
Yeah.
And people want that, as opposed to sometimes we feel like our managers are getting in our way. And I think that's where even I share with clients a tip of, if you're going to give feedback, it's often better to give feedback side by side. So sitting at a table at the same side of the desk, as opposed to me sitting on the other side of the table, like I'm the, interrogationer and I'm going to like ask you these tough questions. And even symbolically, I'm in your way from getting what you want, as
Okay.
opposed to sitting in the car with you and we're trying to go in the same place
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm just giving you some pointers to go, get to the right place in the right
I like that. I like your metaphors. Very good. The ones you used. The
time.
hot
Thanks.
tub one was good.
I got that fun.
So, feedback's one point. Do you get people that kind of a bit stuck with like where they're or problems with their leaders or managers? Do you get
Mhm.
anything like that?
Yes, all the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and are you saying like in a like their managers are getting in their way literally?
Yeah. 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 Maybe. Yeah.
And it can be really hard. I mean, I think you've probably seen statistics. People don't leave jobs; they leave their bosses.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So, yeah.
and it can be really hard. I think that's really where some of the work that I've been doing with some companies is really around like stakeholder management
Mm.
and understanding who my stakeholders are. Like, are there there are going to be direct stakeholders, indirect stakeholders? What am I
Yeah.
doing to ensure that I'm aware that the field exists? Right. I think the worst thing we can do to ourselves is walk into a company and our jobs and just believe that, oh, well, like, I can do whatever I want. Like,
Mm.
it's a meritocracy and I just need to, do a
Yeah.
good job.
Yeah.
Um, and the more that we can have awareness about, oh, like, in order for me to get this proposal approved, I probably need to talk to that person and that person and that person, get them bought in, and then bring those people together. And then this person needs to say yes when he's there. Here's these three people say yes. Right.
Mhm.
And I think when we come to some of these like bad bosses or like difficult bosses, uh, we can, I don't know. There's a lot of different scenarios, but I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of what I hear is, yeah, my boss doesn't trust me. They're very micromanagey,
Mm.
uh, or they like are, not helping me get to where I want to get to, or they're taking credit for what I'm doing. And it gets really hard, to be honest. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
there's no like easy solutions, but I think, when we start thinking about trust, um, one of the tools that I use is something called the trust equation.
Okay.
And the trust equation is, I may get this wrong, competency plus
Ah.
reliability
Okay.
plus intimacy.
Oh.
Okay?
Okay.
All of those three things divided by self-interest.
Right. Okay.
And so when we can see that, if somebody is very self-interested, it really starts to shoot all of the stuff that we're doing up here about like, saying what or doing what you'll say, doing it well, and any kind of like, oh, like how's your family? All that goes out the door when we start realizing that actually they're just in it for themselves and
Yeah.
they're not in it
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
and for the team.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think if you can start to diagnose and evaluate, you're like, oh, this is why we have a really hard time. Like,
Mm.
because actually my boss is like not very reliable. Like, he doesn't follow through on things.
Mhm.
So it's really hard to build trust. So, then I think the question starts to become, okay, if you can start to see some of these things, maybe you can have some different conversations with, I don't know, people around you, maybe a skip level, and somebody
Yeah.
who might be able to
Yeah.
give you some insights
Yeah.
around how to navigate, those challenges. But I would say the biggest challenge is where, yeah, like I see that managers don't trust their teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, yeah, you become
Micromanage.
micromanaged and you just, are like super focused on like, well, I'm going to like do everything myself if they do it wrong. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's very
We're coming to the end of the show today.
hard.
Are there any last words of wisdom or thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
There is so much focus on us being efficient, producing, performing, all this stuff that we just talked about is
Yeah.
all in service of like being better, like the ever pursuit of better, more, everything. And I think we really have to stay grounded in the idea that we are enough today, just as we are also. And it's weird to, have to counterbalance those two because, people say, well, if I'm enough today, then I don't need to do anything more tomorrow. Like I don't need to keep striving. And that's not necessarily true. It's just that, having some compassion for, have I done my best today? Yes, maybe no. But, honestly, like we've gone through probably the toughest 18 months that, society has had to go through in the modern era. And, sure, it's not a global war or anything, but I mean, this pandemic is really creating a lot of external stresses that we haven't really sat down to recognize. And we're all under a lot of stress. And so I think part of this, compassion and cultivating self belief is, hey, I did a good job today. I did enough. And, you know, that's good enough for today. And I accept that. And now I can go to sleep and, you know, do my best tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, yeah, that mental health question of like, yeah, I could always be doing more. Yeah, that creates a lot of anxiety and fear, and it doesn't do good things for our system. So more we can sit in this idea of holding both of those ideas, right? I can still do more, and today I'm enough. If we can hold both of those lightly, I think we'll live more fulfilled and more satisfied lives.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it creates a bit more happiness. Putting too much stress on yourself sometimes, too much pressure. And well, look, Mac, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed some of the content that we've talked about. Some real helpful tips for anyone listening. Some great takeaways. For those that we'll put links in the descriptions on the podcast and then on the YouTube channel. But for anyone that's listening and they're not going to go to the links, where's one place they can go and find you, or a few places?
One place, easy. Just the website is available and open. Macling.com, MACLING.com.
There you go. Nice and easy. Mac, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Richard. I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and thanks for having me.